inaugural episode of the Brethren Way podcast series, it's only right that we spend some time learning about the man who really is the reason behind this podcast, Brian Moore. Stephen Cole interviews Jason Barnhart and Bill Ludwig, two Brethren leaders who had the honor of working closely with Brian and who together were the author and editor of the second edition of his book, The Brethren Witness for the 21st Century. This episode sets the tone for the rest of this series. Lots of jokes, lots of laughter, and lots of rich conversation about the beauty of what it means to be brethren. So please enjoy this episode. Friends, remember Brian Moore.
Well, welcome. My name is Stephen Cole, and you are a part of the Brethren Way podcast. This is a series we are working on behalf of the denomination to talk about identity. And this is the front end of this. And we thought the best way to do this and the proper way to honor our brother is to honor Brian Moore today. He helped and he crafted a book many years ago that kind of led us to this place to have this conversation. My name is Stephen Cole. I'm the executive director of the Brethren Church. I'm not going to be the host of this pretty much the rest of the time. Our brother Jason Barnhart will be doing that, but today it makes more sense for me to be here and interviewing two men who had a great relationship with Brian and kind of carried on his work after Brian became sick and passed away. So today I'm joined by two individuals who were really close with him and took up the challenge of recovering the Brethren Way, a challenge which included a later book by the same name. This book, A Brethren Witness for the 21st Century. I'm here with Bill Ludwig and Jason Barnhart. Jason will be our co-host for the rest of this podcast, but we're going to talk about Brian today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
So we're going to do our best, if you know the three of us, not to laugh and have a good time. We'll laugh.
Well, my first thought was I'm so glad that Brian didn't sue us for copyright infringement when we took the title.
Has the statute of limitations
For the lawsuit?
Yes.
I think he's with Jesus. I don't think he cares anymore.
Brian's a very powerful man.
He's right.
Yes. If Brian's wife Amanda is listening to this, please don't press charges, okay? Please.
Wait, I thought he gave you permission.
He did.
Did he?
We never got it in writing because we're classic brethren. So
Okay, that's fair.
I saw Jason shake his hand.
yes,
But you don't know what he said when he was shaking his hand.
I just saw him shake his hand.
That's true.
fair.
That's true. Yes, fair.
Well, let me give us a little bit of context for this conversation. I'm going to read a little bit of stuff here that Jason wrote for me, and then a quote from the book that helps us kind of to frame this conversation about Brian. So in 2008, Brian Moore was then the pastor of St. James Brethren Church, and he wrote this book called The Brethren Witness for the 21st Century while he was on sabbatical. He did so to help the brethren reclaim their heritage. The book, The Brethren Way, which is the podcast that we are on, we're working our way through, was a 10-year anniversary edition of that text that Jason edited for us. So on page 9 in the original work, the Brethren Witness for the 21st Century, Brian commented, "I realize that the future of the Brethren Church has more to do with the fundamentals of our nature as a church than with some creative methodology." The book was his response to a holy discontent he felt with the brethren regarding the fundamentals of our identity. So you two gentlemen are here to talk to us about our brother. And could you guys just describe for us a little bit who Brian was to you, who he was as a man, a pastor? We'd love to hear from you then.
Yeah, he was 5'9".
He had white hair when you knew him.
He had piercing eyes, lovely, captivating presence.
Yeah, I'm giggling, but this is all true. I mean,
Old leather, old English leather. The aroma. Sorry, once again, Amanda.
You're describing his desk chair.
Well, do I need to be real specific with you, gentlemen? Tell me about the man, his personality, Who he is okay, let's not talk about his description. We don't need that. Thank you.
No, I mean, Brother Bill can jump in here. I mean, Brian was, I mean, he was the epitome of the pastor theologian, and cared deeply about the Brethren way, and saw a movement that largely had been swallowed up by American evangelicalism, and just said, "No, there's more to us than that." And so the little book, it has a horrific cover. So I maybe I can say the graphic design was ever Brian's forte.
We have a couple copies in front of us. There's a castle. What's the point of the castle?
I think you can see the cages that they used to hang brethren on the outside by, and they'd hang them outside, and no food, no water till they expired.
Okay, is that that's not true? Is that the Ader River?
Yes.
Okay.
But Bill is right. There were castles where they would take Anabaptists and
Yes. This isn't the Brethren torture chamber.
I'm just trying to spice it up.
Well, you're doing
and actually, Stephen, the cover that was the original national office.
Oh wow!
Truth. Yes, I can confirm.
Wow.
Can confirm.
Feels so less than.
But I mean, I think he was attempting to start a conversation, and in many places it just kind of fell flat. And so, and then two aspiring young lads said, no, there's something here, and then it just kind of sparked a friendship.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, because I agree with everything Dr. Barnhart has said.
Mercy, gosh.
Brian was also very committed. You said pastor, theologian. He was also very deeply committed in his personal practice of spiritual direction.
Yeah.
And so when you were around Brian, there was a gravity that drew me, and many other, especially our younger pastors, to him. You would walk into his office there at St. James, and every inch of the walls were covered in bookshelves that were completely full. And he knew where every book was, and he had read every page of every book. And you'd be in a conversation with him, and he'd just go without even looking almost, and just pull things and that were, important for the conversation that you were having. He's also super generous with his time and the spaces that he inhabited. The apartment in their basement that we stayed in often when we came to visit him. And I would say that he was a man that lived out loud simplicity, but also a generous spirit. Like when you were with him, you knew that you were around somebody that embodied the kind of follower of Jesus that you might aspire to be.
Yeah.
Not a perfect human by any stretch, but he had that spiritual gravity to him that drew us to him.
And very soft-spoken. Like you had to lean in to actually hear what he was saying to you. Whenever you leaned in, I mean, there was wisdom to be had there. But I think Bill and I were talking before this. We had seen him a few weeks before he passed away, and so he had largely passes away to ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and then writes some numerous things. I mean, his Facebook page was just him kind of processing just wisdom and that spiritual direction formation Bill was talking about. I mean, he was, even in his last days, he's still sharing that via social media. And so we went there, and his wife Amanda always had a pie, and so we'd always sit around the kitchen table there. And it was just a sweet time. And then I think the tragedy of it was when we knew that was probably the last time we would see him this side of the kingdom fully realized. And
do you remember your last conversation with him?
Yeah, I can vividly. At that point, he really couldn't breathe on his own, so he had a machine that was, constantly, pressurizing his lungs so he could breathe. And in order to speak, he had to press a button on the machine so it would stop.
Wow!
And then he could speak until he needed oxygen, and then maybe as you're listening to this, you know, that just seems like an insignificant detail, but when you're standing in front of a man who literally is cutting off his supply of oxygen to say a word to you,
Yeah.
you're definitely leaning in and wanting to hear. And he said that he was proud of us.
Yeah.
He said for us to carry on the work.
Were y'all together?
We were, yeah, we were together.
He loved us.
Yeah, said that.
Yeah.
So when somebody's, you know,
Now I'm tearing up.
it was
Wow.
it was powerful.
I'm tearing up and I wasn't
Yeah,
there.
no.
Yeah, you I mean, I you know, almost felt like he knighted us, you know, in that moment, you know, it was one of those moments, because he was one of those guys that you wanted to make him proud.
Yeah, you knew a legend was passing away. I think
Yes.
he really was.
Wow. So what was it about his version of the book, A Brother and Witness for the 21st Century, the original? What was it about that made you want to commit to this project, rediscovering? So we have a couple of books after it. We have the second version of A Brother and Witness for the 21st Century. And then we have the Brethren Way, which is the first book edited with a couple of, so we've got a couple of works downstream from the original. But what was it about the original that made you want to commit to continuing on through?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak a little bit for Bill and I both, I guess. I think Bill and I both shared kind of the discontent of largely brethren around us were just vanilla evangelical who happened to drag along practices like foot washing and shrine immersion baptism. And we'd lost the story that really animated those practices. And I think for me, it was, oh my goodness. I mean, Bill and I would always talk about the values of the Brethren Way are timeless. The expressions, I mean, they're always going to be time specific, trapped in context. But I think for the first time I saw somebody who was kind of drawing out these larger timeless values from the Brethren's story, that really got me excited. And really, I found myself hopeful about, oh my goodness, this way is exactly what our current cultural moment needs. So that was my take, Bill. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, my first reaching out to Brian on this idea came from a very practical need with young leaders and like church planters that were coming in from outside of our denominational family that liked what they were seeing, liked what they were hearing, but would ask, what does it mean to plant a Brethren church? What does it mean to be a Brethren leader? And I think that it was difficult to find a description of that anywhere that could be agreed upon by a broad, swath of our folks. Encountering, Brian's book and reading the opening chapter, he described what I was running into, what we were running into, in a very practical way. And, it was, okay, I see this too. We see this too. Let's, we have a very real need right now to answer these questions. And he had already started this work. So then it was by his own admission, this isn't exhaustive. This isn't complete. And so we were interested in working along with him to add to its fullness.
Yeah, that's kind of where my question is. Well, why wasn't his book? Now he admitted that he didn't think it was complete. Did we took it and we expanded on it? So what were we at? What were we adding? What were we trying to capture? What was it that led you to the creation of the second book by the same name, A Brethren Witness for the 21st Century?
I always got the feeling that Brian just saw his book as kind of a conversation starter.
Yes.
Whet the appetite a little bit. And he always, Brian did what I wish all, especially boomer Brethren leaders, would do right now. This is not mine. I am passing it on to you for you to do what you feel like needs to happen here. So he would never insist that my book is the only way and it's definitive. That just was never Brian at all. And so Bill and I were very intentional in the book that we edited together to go, it really takes a community of voices to be able to speak to this. It wasn't just Bill and I writing for the book.
Right. Matter of fact, he doesn't say you're the author, it says you're the editors.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of that was because of what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were just editing and what people were saying. And even the Brethren Way, I'm listed as the editor of it, but because there was, the Brethren Way was just a way of just, it was a way, right? It was an attempt to, at a 10-year anniversary mark, to be able to say, hey, don't forget this guy and this conversation. And even then we had people like Jerry Florida and others who said, here are things I would have loved to have seen Brian explore a little more, which was really, really cool.
You described Brian as a pastor and a theologian. We like to pigeonhole our people because it's just easier. Pastors belong in the church, theologians belong in the academy. Why was Brian good at merging that together? What was it about him? And how can we help our folks? Maybe there's some other ones out there.
For me, and I think I mentioned this, like spiritual formation was the thing that tied those pieces together. Okay. Like his absolute hunger for any knowledge. I mean, he read tons, and it was all to apply it to our lives, or apply it to the life of any of the numerous people that he was mentoring. That's what tied it together. That's what made it practical, and I think that's what made it effective. That his pursuit of knowledge and wisdom wasn't just for himself, although I think he enjoyed it.
Oh yeah.
But he took those gifts and gave them away on purpose. That was that was the outlet of all the gifts that he'd been given.
Yeah, and I think Bill and I collectively made up the whole of Brian's brain. It took two of us to make it. Because you know, it wasn't that Bill wasn't interested in the more academic research side of it, and that I wasn't interested in the praxis, but really it was fascinating that there were different drivers that led us to come together to love this project. So, I mean, like, as Bill already said, there was a desire to go, what does it mean to plant distinctly brethren churches? And then for me, it's just, you know, my journey has been one of just ongoing research in the area. And really, I think if you separate those from one another, then you lose it all. And yeah, I was interrupting your question there, Steve, and I apologize, was because I just, you're right. It wasn't, pastor theologian wasn't separated. When I think of him, they were always together. And Bill, that's a really good insight. The spiritual formation piece, that was key, because Brian had a deep interest in the writings of Eugene Peterson and Frederick Buechner and others, of this way to be able to tell a compelling story that brings together these elements we're talking about.
Yeah, and yet also had a bit of mysticism to him.
Yes,
right. And so that was almost as equally compelling as his vast knowledge, his, you know, as much as he read, his partnership with the Holy Spirit, especially engaged in spiritual formation with somebody, was beautiful.
Yeah,
it was art and science, you know, combined in one man, and in a context with another person.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking just now, this year marks 15 years since he wrote this little book. For 15 years. Brian passed away in 2015.
Yeah.
But yeah, 15 years since this little book.
Wow. So in the Brethren Way, the book we're going through on this podcast was published 5 years ago on the 10-year anniversary of the original 21st century book.
Right.
Okay. What Jason is saying is it's time for you to pay him to write another book.
Well,
no, I think both of us, it's time for us to do another book.
Well, listen, this is not anywhere near our conversations, but as I'm flipping through the second version of the Brethren 21st century book, and I get to the copyright date, 2 years shy of 10 years, 2015.
Okay.
So we're 2 years shy of 10 years of the second version of that. So we add to Brian gives us, he wets our whistle in the original. You two gentlemen take this, you run with it. We talk about more than he does. We talk about what he does, but we add to it. We have other voices to that. Are we, our folks, the brethren, are we heeding this call? Are we doing well with this information?
I think Bill has to share, because there was a process that went into making that book. Where we even gathered the list of what the values were.
Yeah.
And so Bill can share a little bit about that story.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that Jason and I were pretty confident in is that as the young kids on the block, that we needed to seek out the Jedi masters in in our tribe, right? And so Brian, of course, was one of those, and in talking about his generous posture and letting us extend the same title, look, who should be speaking into this and how. And so we had a retreat with Brian and Dr. Dale Stouffer and Dr. Jerry Flora, and I think Jason and I probably could have just sat in the corner of the room and listened to those three men talk.
Yeah, there's a lot of why are we in this room with these giants?
Right, right. But that is where the expansion of, Brian talked about 3 or 4 particular dialectics, and what then came to bear here were, I think, 13 historical ideals.
Yeah, I think I counted 12 or 13 chapters in the book. I did. They're not numbered on that.
Right. And these historical ideals were informed by the historical theologians, the practical the practical ministry folks in our tribe. And then we took the initial list and we did some focus groups around the country. As we were traveling for other things, we would set up these opportunities to talk with leaders in our tribe, not all of them, but in particular contexts and settings, and really our focus groups helped inform the final wording and descriptions of these ideals, which was exciting to know that even the formation of that book followed the communal discernment aspect of who we are.
Yeah.
And now if you look through the list of people, there's some people there who are no longer in pastoral ministry. They're with the different denominations. Some have went to be with the Lord. I mean, it just kind of shows the values are timeless, but the expression that came through with those particular voices is contextual.
Yeah. So my question was, how are we doing? Are we heating this conversation? We started the conversation in 2010. You said, I think you said, it was when this first one was published. 2008. Excuse me. And we carried the conversation on. We're here again talking about identity. How are we doing?
And
P.S. We're not really struggling culturally right now with identity at all. I'm sorry.
Was that sarcasm? Southern sarcasm is hard to detect.
Hard to detect. Yeah, but it was. Let me be very clear. That was sarcastic.
I mean, on one hand, Stephen, I'd like to hear you answer that question as, being the Brethren Pope. And this is my way to kind of just pivot it back to you.
Wow.
I do have thoughts.
Yes. Well, that's fun. I will say this. It's hard to be. The phrase losing the forest for the trees is pretty easy when you have to sit in the middle and lead through, right? It's easy to go, we're terrible at this, we're clearly missing here, we're clearly missing there, and yet you wake up and go, oh, look at that, it's been 5 years and the ball has moved. But every day from day 1 to year 5 is it's a hard walk, and culture doesn't help. We're struggling with relationships culturally, and that gets poured and spilled into our daily lives with each other in the church. And so while since 2008 have we recaptured our identity in a most complete, beautiful way? Absolutely not.
Right.
I'm not sure that happens on this side of eternity, though. But I sure do hope that we wrestle with these things and don't just one day say, these are not worth wrestling with anymore. Let's pick one that was, as we say in our centennial statement, historical. Our peace witness. Our peace witness, we say in our centennial statement, is a historical witness.
Well, that's what we say about the 3 negatives.
The 3 negatives, all 3 of them, right?
and that would be that's my critique.
Yeah.
Is I personally feel this has not really jumped beyond just reflections on our history.
Right.
So I know we're in a denomination that's talking about vision and all of this, and and Bill and I were together during Ken Hunn's tenure as executive director. I remember Ken with the Brethren Witness book. He was constantly pushing on, why does this matter for the kingdom movement today? I remember being so frustrated with Ken, because I'm like, but now I'm like, no, that was the right, because the question really that I want to ask is, why should the Brethren Way even exist today? I think it has great appeal for our cultural moment.
Yeah.
But I have remarked often, I get wildly frustrated by pastors who tell me I'm not interested in being brethren, I just want to make disciples. And one, like, those two are at odds with one another. And I'm like, but you make disciples in a very particular way.
Yeah.
Right. In the way that you were made, and most likely in the Brethren Way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to echo and maybe strengthen Jason's statement that it's, our witness, if you will, the way that we follow Jesus is particularly compelling for generations younger than us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is still, like, even right now, our historical ideals, you take a stroll through those, and if you got your ear to the ground with, certainly millennials and everyone after, you see things that even non-believers are activists for in their own context.
Yes.
Or even on the broader stage. And so why does it matter? Why does it matter why a church called Brethren is a question that is a historical, question that we've wrestled with. And, for my contribution to this, and I think for Brian Moore's passion in initiating that question again for us, it's the world needs us to be us right now.
Yes.
Right now. And it should become a joyful thing to live as brethren, not a hardship, not a painful betrayal of any other long-held convictions
Or the gospel.
Well,
or the gospel.
Brian actually called it a joyful obedience.
Yes.
I mean, joyful obedience.
Yeah, because somewhere along the line, God sovereignly allowed this tribe to become.
Yeah.
Just like he sovereignly allowed every other tribe to become. And we can look at that as oh boy, that's indication of a lack of unity in the church. And maybe we can talk about that. But I think more than that, our Father knew that the world would need every last kind of picture of his relationship with us, of his kingdom.
Right.
And it would take all of those to bring, all people to him.
Yes.
And so, the joyful part, yes, but the obedience part, like he sovereignly, we could say, even through circumstances and the work of the Spirit in our forebears, he sovereignly called us into being. Yeah. Because the world needed us and needs us still.
Yes. Yes.
And as the cultural milieu, if you will, has turned a few times since our founding, we find ourselves once again wrestling with some of the very same dynamics. I mean, less hanging on castle walls, I'll admit, but some persecution of different ideas that are practically effective in the world. If you stand outside maybe the vanilla evangelical party, you don't get to speak at places, and you don't get the same invitations to hang out or to job invites, etc. And then I'm getting in the weeds, but you hear what I'm saying, that we are once again in a moment where maybe there's some state church kind of dynamics that are pushing on the way of following Jesus that the brethren have historically held to.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think the hope for future brethren work, and I would love to work with Bill, I'd love to get on projects around this, is, and even this podcast, this is not for boomers or older. and it's not that I don't value that,
Not disrespect.
but we need to begin to have a conversation, because there's been a lot of generations that have followed now who I think are hungry for that. Xers, millennials, Gen Z, we're Gen Alpha now.
We're in Alpha,
So it's a
Xers don't matter.
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
They just
Sorry, gang.
They just sit out and judge. So, but it really is this sense of, because boomer brethren came of age in this tribe when evangelicalism was, by all perception, was a unified kind of thing, and it was growing and growing and growing, and it measured kind of its effectiveness by its political power in the world.
Yes.
I think the blessing for us right now is that evangelicalism is fracturing. And so maybe that stronghold, there are evangelical impulses throughout the centuries that I don't want to lose, but American evangelicalism as almost kind of a state church in many ways.
Yeah, a geopolitical entity.
Yeah, is I think loosening that grip could allow us to actually be who we're called to be. And I think, I'm with Bill. This scratches an itch that I think is being that's coming up in this cultural moment.
Yeah, I think when you flipped the question back to me, and I think there's some encouragement here. I was before I was in this role, was a part of some of our social issues rewriting, and I helped be a part of the Peace Witness writing. And prior to that writing, we called our Peace Witness historical, and we kind of sort of didn't worry about it past that. But in that writing in 2014, I think at 13 and 14, and it ultimately being a part of our statement on social issues, you can now look now from 14 to today and go, oh, there are many of us, not one or two anymore, but many of us who go, oh, that is an ideal that I hold. Where prior to that, because we didn't talk about it, we really didn't wrestle with it, we had one group of people led by one man who lived in Florida. We called it the Peace
Brethren Peace Initiative.
Brethren Peace Initiative.
BPI.
Yes. And we kind of relegated all of our peace witness to that group of 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
But I would say, so we're getting lost for the forest because the trees are surrounding us. But you can poke up your head after a while and go, look at that. We've gone from here to here. And it's no longer just a group of 3 or 4 people for us. This value of peace has changed and has shaped and moved back in a direction that would be less historical and more actual, something we want to live out.
Yeah, more relevant. Well,
more relevant.
I mean, the current social environment
Right.
is more than just chaos. There's a lot of violence and aggression in almost every sphere, right, that we're exposed to. And so, even if it's just a casual look back at the historical ideal, right, of peace, we can look at that and say, wow, today something that stands apart from that is actually incredibly valuable. There's a firm ground over here that we can stand on that's apart from the chaos. And man, I think the world is longing for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I asked you guys, have the brethren heeded Brian's call? And I think the answer is yes, and of course no, right? We need to continue moving in this direction and walking toward this. And when we find that we haven't, we should pick it up and continue to walk in that, and really capturing our identity in Christ in the way that God has created the Brethren Church to be. Right. So that's good. Last thoughts, gentlemen, as we wrap up our conversation here about Brian.
I think that maybe a next step for all of us is to have some leadership provided to give us pictures of how these ideals can be manifested today. Questions like how do you participate in the peace witness? How do you participate in your congregation or in your personal life, brethren, follower of Jesus, in communal discernment, or the idea of future generations being equipped to engage in the world on their terms, right, and interpret the scripture in their cultural context? I would like to, I think that would be a valuable thing, right? What's the old adage? What gets measured is what gets done, and what gets rewarded is what gets repeated. Like how can we help those that want to move closer to the historical effectiveness of the Brethren witness? What sort of redemptive imagination can we inspire in them with a little help, with these pictures?
Yeah.
Because certainly Brian did that. He called us to that. I mean, the idea of tethered freedom is a picture.
Oh, yes.
It's another book. Yeah,
Yes.
we can't talk about them all in one podcast,
Right.
but this is, I mean, just the picture of tethered freedom, again, a dialectic that is powerful in describing the spirit of the Brethren church, right? Being in the middle way, right? This third way that is anchored in the kingdom, and it has the blessed mission of having the freedom to export that into the culture it finds itself in, is so powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't have much to add to what Bill just shared. That was good. This is why we keep him around these kind of things.
There's some cobwebs in the closet.
We found the rock.
No, that's great. I think I want to say I love our boomer brethren. I'm not trying to, but
They heard you already, man. You can't go back on that.
Okay. We can't edit that out, we can't redact, but I think for every generation to embody a posture like Brian's with the generations coming behind them.
Yeah.
To be able, I mean, Brian the book was a catalyst, but yeah, as Bill said, sitting with him around his kitchen table, even long before, ALS took its toll on him. And he asked good probing questions. He cared deeply about what the Spirit was doing in you and saying to you, because he knew that his words would take on flesh in you in ways that he could have never dreamed or thought of, and so, and I think if I had to offer a word of caution to our brethren in this moment, I've seen a lot of where we have taken up the strategies of the world, and I've not seen that generosity of spirit that Brian had, that winsome smile, that deep commitment to spiritual formation, and just a love of the next generation that was animated by, my gosh, I get to help them love something as much as I love.
Yeah.
And so when I think about him, I miss that. Because Brian was, when I think of people like Brian or Charlie Munson and others, these are people that, were legends, and I think word is overused, I'm not, but it was just this sense of there were exemplars that we could point to. I always think when Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ," and when it first reads, you're like, "Gosh, Paul, that's kind of arrogant." But I think Paul is honestly, following Jesus can be really ambiguous. You need people to look at, and so I feel the challenge of, can we be like the Bryans and be people that people can look at? Follow me as I follow the Brethren way, and I am deeply encouraged, because when I talk to younger generations of brethren, even younger than us around this table here, there's just they just get this intuitively. I mean, they don't have to think long and hard about this.
Yeah, sometimes we have to give them language for it.
Yeah, that's what they're looking for, and they'll say the phrase we always heard again and again: "I was brethren and didn't know it." And my prayer for our tribe is that exclamation would happen over and over again, more than we could ever dream up or imagine.
Absolutely. Well, this is a beautiful conversation. Thank you both for joining in with us on this. And I thank God for Brian Moore and the life that he had.
Amen.
So blessings to you both. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks, Stephen.
Thanks. Bye.